Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta came into office in 2013, ushering a new era of leadership in Kenya's democratic history. Now, in his second and final term, the president has embarked on a journey to anchor Kenya's position as a key regional and global player. But what are President Kenyatta's plans in steering Kenya onto a path of inclusive growth? And with his second term preceded by polarizing politics during the election period last year, will the president succeed in rallying the country towards its development goals? Well, I sat down with President Kenyatta to get his response to these questions and more. I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to this special edition of Talk Africa. The dust seems to have finally settled in Kenya following a protracted election period last year. Now, as the ruling Jubilee Party reaches out across the party lines, the country's focus has been shifted to economic recovery and growth. Before my interview with President Kenyatta, let's first take a look at the state of affairs in Kenya today.
Kenya has finally moved on from last year's divisive elections. Earlier this year, a historical handshake between President Uhuru Kenyatta and opposition leader Raila Odinga indicates the country is now finally on its path of healing and reconciliation. However, the prolonged political season has left its toll on the country's economy. While positive trend has been registered in some sectors, overall economic growth rate dipped to 4.9%, a 5-year low. At Kenya's 54th Independence Day celebrations, President Uhuru Kenyatta announced the Big Four agenda as the focus of his second term. An ambitious plan that seeks to provide Kenyans with affordable housing, universal healthcare, food security, and a manufacturing sector. Tens of thousands of jobs for Kenyans are also expected in the process. In light of the stabilized political environment and Kenya's booming infrastructure construction, the World Bank now projects Kenya's GDP will rebound to 5.8% by the end of 2018 and 6.1% into 2019. However, the East African country still faces significant growth hurdles. With domestic uncertainties, regional security threats, and changing global trade environment, President Kenyatta's government must rally nationwide support in its strive for realizing its development goals and achieving middle-income status by 2030. How these challenges are to be addressed will indeed determine the attainability of the country's economic blueprint and how President Uhuru Kenyatta's legacy will be remembered.
Excellency. I'm very well, thank you.
Nice to see you again.
Excellency, thank you very much for your time. Let's start with the government's project, your Big Four agenda for Kenya. First of all, what informed that decision of the Big Four and how are you going to implement all of that?
Well, let's begin by saying, as you know, my first time we really focused a lot on the physical infrastructure because, as you know, we had a huge infrastructural deficit in our country. And we committed ourselves in the first term to really focus on roads, on power, the rail, the harbors, the ports. Yeah? And this second term, I thought it was necessary now to start dealing with the software, start dealing and engaging in those things that affect the lives, the day-to-day lives of people. Yeah? And key amongst those, of course, is food security, which is one of our Big Four, followed closely by housing, health, and jobs for our young people. And that's why we decided that these are the areas that we need in order to ensure that we uplift our people from poverty, give people good health, and give people a healthy, balanced diet, while at the same time giving them a roof over their heads and focusing really on manufacturing so that we can take advantage of this huge youthful population that is well educated and that is energetic, talented, and ready to work and hardworking. So these are the areas that I have decided to focus on my second term.
Well, there are those who are going to be asking, though, that 50 years or so after independence, Kenya is still talking about, matters of food security, matters of universal health care. How is it Kenya has not been able to achieve this in the last 50 years?
Well, I think it's also been a lack of focus. This is something that has, especially over the last 20, 30 years, we really sort of, I think, got sidetracked. We became too involved, too much politicking. Our society became divisive. And this is why I'm also focusing on the agenda of national unity, of bringing our people together, of bringing leaders together, so that we really can now begin focusing our attention on the needs of the people as opposed to petty political bickering. Yet we all know that at the end of the day, whether it is President Uhuru or anybody else, these key items are critical to all our people, whoever the president may be. So why can't we come together and work together to achieve these for our people and to ultimately lift them from poverty? And so that unity agenda, I think, was one of the biggest stumbling blocks towards helping us achieve our objectives.
Let me come back to this 3 social welfare projects that you're implementing, though, and the 4th one is on manufacturing. And to industrialize, this has been a big push for Africa now. To industrialize, you need efficient energy. So what exactly is your strategy for achieving industrialization for Kenya, for achieving that manufacturing strategy?
Well, as I told you, I said during our first time, we really focused on our infrastructure, because without a solid, reliable infrastructural base, manufacturing is impossible. We need efficient ports. We need an efficient rail system. We need roads so that people can access markets even with their products, and also help add to the value chain. This is why we are focused on electricity and ensuring that we have electricity in every part of our country. And that's one thing I'm particularly proud of. We've been able to move connectivity or electricity connectivity in our country from about 32% when I took over in 2013. We were about 32% of the population. And today we're talking almost about 60%, with a target that we want to be by 95, to be at 95% within the next 4 years. These are all critical ingredients of a society that is desirous to become industrial. And that's why the focus, and I believe we've also done and made major strides in our doing business environment. And these are the things that then attract investment. And as a result, we have seen more and more companies, both domestic as well as international, finding their way now to Kenya. And Kenya is becoming now an attractive investment destination because, like I said, we have the labor. Talented, hardworking, right? Youthful, and we have the location as well. So these ingredients put together, I think, is what makes Kenya now ready and on the verge of actually an industrial takeoff.
So Kenya is on the verge of an industrial takeoff. Let's take a look at East Africa's economic growth, though, because according to the IMF forecast for 2018, a growth rate for Ethiopia is now at 8.2%, powered by energy and industrialization, and Kenya's is at about 5.8%. What do you see as the factors that will be driving economic growth for Kenya?
Economic growth is going to be driven, like I said, by manufacturing. When we talk of housing, right? Which is one of our main pillars. That is also going to be a key and critical element of our economic growth. When we talk about food security, here we have value chains, we have increased agricultural output. All of these are what really will be the main drive behind our industrial takeoff and our economic growth. And these, again, are central to my government or my administration's agenda, going forward. And I know you may say that Tanzania, as you just mentioned, or Ethiopia, have higher growth rates. But you've always got to understand and appreciate that we are talking about a much larger base here in Kenya, right? Because Kenya, in comparison to our neighbors, is relatively much further ahead than the others. So our 5% growth rate is based on a much higher GDP than most of our neighbors. So that needs to be taken into consideration when you look at the growth figures. And 5.6%, which is what we're targeting, for a country that is a non-mineral exporting country, non-oil exporting country, I think it's quite impressive.
Right. You're driving regional trade and the issue of regional trade, though. And recently, African leaders agreed to establish the Continental Free Trade Area. For Kenya specifically, what opportunities do you see there?
I see tremendous opportunities. And that's why Kenya was at the forefront of pushing the Continental Free Trade Area. We, I believe, were the second signatories, having ratified it immediately after we left Kigali. And I believe that if you look at the African continent, it is a continent of approximately 1 billion people, 1 billion of whom in excess of 60% or 65% are young, right? So the opportunities for intra-Africa trade are huge. There is great potential for us to trade amongst each other, or to trade with each other on the continent. Because if you look at Europe, I think almost 30 to 40% of their trade is in and amongst Europe. In Africa, it is less than 10%. So there is a huge opportunity if we remove some of these trade barriers that have prevented Africans from trading with one another. So I am a great believer in the Continental Free Trade area, and I really believe that by removing these artificial barriers that have kept us apart, we will have great opportunity for prosperity, through increased trade with each other on the African continent. If you look at ourselves now, let's talk about Kenya, we're talking about a population of 45 million people. But if just talk of the Eastern African region, we're talking about a population of close to 200, 300 million people. That makes a destination that much more attractive for investment, because you are talking about a much wider, a much bigger market. And this really has been one of the biggest constraints, because you don't want to come up with a set up factory for producing or mass scale production of vehicles, for example, right? If you're only talking about a limited market. But if you had the potential, for example, of the East African region, that will attract assemblers to Kenya, who would then not only be manufacturing for our region or the continent, but would also now have the economies of scale to want to also take advantage of our cheaper labor power to manufacture here for other markets across the globe.
So all this, of course, is coming against the backdrop of several Western countries that are now going for trade protectionism, or looking inward more than, going fully embracing globalization. How is this, though, going to impact Africa? How is it going to impact countries such as Kenya in terms of trade protectionism?
Well, for starters, we ourselves are not keen on these new barriers that people are putting up, especially when Africa now is coming of age, right? We believe in this globalization, and we believe that trade should be free and people should be able to take advantage of that. It's unfortunate that people are now beginning to look more inward, especially in Europe. There's a similar feeling, for example, in America as well. But I strongly believe that those proponents of opening up markets to allow the free movement of goods and services, ultimately, is the best way to assure all of us, right, that we are working together at a multilateral level to ensure prosperity for all. Inwardness, closing yourselves up, I think is a short-sighted, it's a short-sighted vision. There's no long-term position in it, because all that's going to happen is people are taking advantage, unfortunately, maybe because of slowdowns and etc., thinking that if they close themselves in, that may protect their industries. But at the end of the day, I think that can only hurt as opposed to add value.
How do you see this, though, impacting the South-South cooperation, particularly China and Africa's relationship, now that China is Africa's biggest trading partner?
I think that they're moving in the right direction, and they're understanding it, and they're appreciating the importance of having open societies that can trade and do business with each other. And I think the short-sightedness sometimes of some of these countries that are now beginning to withdraw creates new opportunities for South-South cooperation. We have a lot of Chinese companies now that are wanting to invest in Kenya, on the African continent. We're seeing the same with India. We're seeing the same with certain corporations also in South America. So this, to me, is a golden opportunity for all of us. And we are keen and we're hopeful that, especially with the Silken Road initiative, the initiative by China, this in itself is aimed at encouraging greater trade on the basis of a win-win situation along the south.
We're in conversation with Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta. Talk Africa takes a short break now. Stay tuned for part 2 of the interview. We'll be right back.
China Global Television Network. From broadcast centers in Beijing, Washington and Nairobi. A unique global perspective. 6 channels and a video content service. News when you want it and where you want it. On TV screens, websites, mobile platforms and social media. CGTN. See the difference.
Excellency, I want to get your thoughts on South Sudan, on certain regional issues, because, of course, for trade to grow, and that is what the East African region is pushing for trade to grow, there's got to be stability, there's got to be peace and security. South Sudan recently signed a peace deal between President Salva Kiir and Riek Machar. What are your thoughts on that deal?
Well, first and foremost, peace and stability are essential ingredients in order for us to be able to have true economic growth and development. So Kenya has been very keen and has worked very hard with all parties under the IGAD framework to convince our brothers and sisters in South Sudan that there is need for them to come together. There have been a series of initiatives, finally culminating now in the signing that happened in Khartoum a few weeks ago. And I believe now that all parties concerned are keen to find a peace deal. I think all parties are wary, and I think they recognize that the people who have suffered the most are the people of South Sudan. I believe they also appreciate that they need to, first of all, come together, even on a transitional basis, in order to put in place the structures that will then allow the people, through democratic methods, to elect a government. But today that's not possible, and I think there's that recognition as well, that unless they put in place the governance structures, unless they put in place the security measures, as they have agreed now to do, they have an army that is not an army of this group or that group, but an army of the Republic of Sudan, and that is loyal to the Republic of South Sudan. These are the key ingredients, I believe, that will help us achieve the objective of peace and ultimately stability in South Sudan.
Kenya is also very involved in Somalia. What is the situation in Somalia now? Are you still concerned about the terrorism situation with Al-Shabaab?
Well, of course we are, because as you know, there are still attacks both within Sudan, along our border. We've also had challenges sometimes with terrorist attacks from the Al-Shabaab. So Kenya is committed to working together with other countries. You know, we have Uganda, Djibouti, Ethiopia, all who have soldiers in Somalia currently, working together with the national government, the federal government, to see how we again can jointly ensure that we rid ourselves of this Shabaab problem, so that the government of Somalia now can begin to focus itself to deliver for their people.
Excellency, I want to get your thoughts now on China's initiatives, the Belt and Road Initiative, because last year you were among several African leaders that were invited to attend the Belt and Road Forum in Beijing. First of all, what is your opinion of the Belt and Road Initiative and its significance to Africa, particularly Kenya?
I think it is tremendous, because what is the objective? The objective is to open up our economies to trade. The objective is to encourage trade amongst us, connecting Asia, parts of Europe, through the Gulf region, Arab states, linking ourselves all the way through the African continent, from the eastern side of Africa all the way across to the west. Right? And I believe it has huge potential for a win-win situation for all who are involved. And that is why we are very keen as a country, and I believe also as a continent, to partner strongly with China in this initiative that would bring people closer together, will bring opportunities. In a few years' time, if we all remain focused, I can see the balance change with a great deal more trade amongst our non-traditional partners, right? And increasing the linkage between, like I said, Asia and Africa, which I think will have tremendous value on the basis, as I said, of a win-win for all parties concerned.
The standard gauge railway, though, is one of the significant opportunities brought about by the Belt.
Absolutely.
How significant is this for Kenya?
I think it's very significant, because we have now done, as you've correctly stated, the first phase, Mombasa to Nairobi. We're now doing what we're calling Section 2A, which is now heading out to Naivasha. And we're hopefully looking very keenly to negotiating with our Chinese friends and partners to now take the railway from Naivasha all the way to Lake Victoria. Now, as you know, once it's at Lake Victoria, we have access again and opens up that rail line to Uganda, to Burundi, to Rwanda, to Tanzania, and ultimately further into DRC, Zambia. And this again is opening up trade, making transport less costly, and improving opportunities for investment as well.
LAPSSET is another major project that your government is working on, though. How do you respond, though, to criticisms that some of these projects may not be viable in the long term?
I don't think so, because like I said, first and foremost, we are living in a world where we have a deficit of infrastructure. Through the LAPSSET corridor, which, as you know, was an initiative of Kenya, Ethiopia, and South Sudan initially. What is the objective? The objective is to find an easy route from Lamu all the way through to Ethiopia, We're talking about that whole southern region of Ethiopia, where it'll be cheaper for them to move their goods through Lamu. We're talking about South Sudan. Today, they have to travel all the way down through, as you know, to Kitale, up to the border now with South Sudan. This would cut that route for South Sudan's goods again by almost half. So that again is another huge potential. So these corridors, which Kenya is focusing on, and as you know, have been recognized even at the AU as being important corridors for both economic development, increased trade within Africa as well. I believe that a lot of work has gone into this, and the benefits that will come up from opening up our region as a result of these links is tremendous.
You will be attending the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation in Beijing shortly, though. First of all, which areas of discussions are you particularly keen on? What do you think the summit should be focusing on if African countries, and particularly Kenya, are to draw some good opportunities from?
I want to continue focusing on infrastructure development. I want us looking forward to attracting Chinese investment also to Kenya. But I'm also keen to see how we can begin working on reducing our trade deficit by increasing opportunities for more Kenyan products also to access the Chinese market. So I think these are the areas for me that will be of key concern, of key focus while in China.
Right, Excellency, I do want to come back to your talk about unity as we wind up the program here, because Kenya had, quite a strong electioneering period, and there was quite a divisive election there, and you and the opposition leader Raila Odinga came together and pledged unity for the country. First of all, what do you aim to achieve from that, and how is that going?
First and foremost, what do we aim to achieve? As I said right at the beginning of the program, for any country to really be properly focused on the issues and the needs of a people, leaders need to come together. Leaders need to be able to work together, because the challenges that we face are challenges that have no barriers. We don't need to fight over them. And so far, we are working very well. We consult regularly, right? Not just with Raila, but with all other leaders, right? With a clear mission that we must bring our people together, and we must bring to an end this issue of divisive politics. And I myself am committed to leaving a much more united, a much more cohesive country than I found. We will always have differing opinions, but we must come together and accept that despite our differing opinions, we all belong to Kenya. We all belong to Africa. We need one another. Governments will come and go. Kenya will always remain, and we must focus on keeping our people united and focused on the future with a peaceful, stable, and ultimately prosperous nation.
Excellency, thank you very much.
Thank you, Beatrice.
Excellent. And that's all we have time for this week on Talk Africa. Thank you for tuning in to this special edition of the program. Remember, the conversation goes on online through our social media handles on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And do join me again next week for more Talk Africa. I'm Beatrice Marshall. Goodbye.